How small is too small? Singapore's planners have actually been asking this question for more than a decade. Back in 2012, URA introduced controls outside the central area, specifically to moderate what it called the excessive development of shoebox units. Then in 2018, it tightened those rules after observing that dwelling unit sizes in new private housing projects were getting smaller. For most affected developments, the maximum number of homes was calculated using roughly 85 square meters of gross floor area per permitted unit. And in 9 areas where redevelopment could place heavier pressure on local infrastructure, the figure was 100 square meters. Now, this is important. It did not mean every apartment had to be 85 square meters. It was a control on the number of apartments a developer could create from the available floor area. And URA didn't stop there. Developers were also asked to provide a better mixture of sizes, including larger homes for bigger families and multi-generational living. By today's rules outside the central area, at least 20% of units must have 100 square meters or more of net internal space, while no more than 20% can be 50 square meters or smaller. So the planning intention is quite clear. URA itself said these measures were intended to help moderate the reduction in dwelling unit sizes and safeguard the livability of residential estates. But the central area was different. There is no equivalent cap on the total number of dwelling units there, partly because the city centre is well served by public transport and new developments are considered less likely to strain local infrastructure. Yet URA eventually noticed something else. Unit sizes in the central area were showing what it called a persistent trend of decline. And that created a problem, because Singapore increasingly wants its city centre to be somewhere people don't just work, but actually live, including families. So in 2022, URA introduced another safeguard. For affected new developments in the central area, at least 20% of homes must have a net internal area of at least 70 square meters, around 753 square feet. URA specifically described that as a reasonable size for small families given the tighter space constraints in central Singapore. So what does all this tell us? The shrinking home debate isn't simply something buyers imagined after walking through show flats. The planning authority itself has been watching unit sizes and stepping in when it felt the housing mix needed adjustment. And I must say, the recent GFA harmonized newer homes feel more spacious for the same square footage. Look, what I just mentioned doesn't automatically mean small homes are bad, because there is another side to this story. A 500 square foot apartment may feel impossibly small for a family, but perfectly adequate for someone living alone. A young couple might choose less space to stay closer to work. An older couple whose children have moved out might actively prefer a smaller home, which raises a fascinating question. What if Singapore homes are becoming smaller, not only because land is expensive, but because Singapore households themselves are changing? And that change is true today. We're seeing later marriages, more singles, fewer births, smaller families, and an aging population. We'll come back to those demographic changes shortly, because they create a surprisingly difficult housing question. If the household of tomorrow is different from the household of yesterday, should the home of tomorrow be different too? And this is where affordability gets complicated. Smaller homes can help keep the total purchase price within reach, but shrink them too much, and another question eventually appears. Not simply, can I afford to buy this home, but is this the life I want to live?